Hi everyone, I'm Mary Colette Rogers, Healthy Kitchen Companion, and today I want to talk to you about boredom at the dinner table, and specifically the question of whether it's okay if your diet is boring as long as it's healthy. In other words, if you're eating a diet of real whole foods, does it matter that it's boring and repetitious? And I've had to reconsider my usual answer to this. A couple of things have come up over the past few weeks that made me think about it a little bit more. And I actually think there are some risks associated with eating a boring diet. And so I want to share those with you today, but along with some ideas about what we can do to prevent boredom at the dinner table. So let's start though by telling you why a webinar on boredom at the dinner table. And the reason is that it's a pretty common topic. And in fact, in our classes, fully 75% of the participants usually say something around, oh, I am just so tired of making the same things over and over again. And just over the past couple of weeks, I've heard this complaint a couple more times. The first was from a woman named Susan, and I'm going to talk about her in just a minute. But the other one was at a recent health fair where I was exhibiting. And I usually ask people that are visitors to my booth, how's your food life going? Is there anything that I can help you with? And one fellow named John came by and he was saying that, our food life is pretty good. My wife and I eat pretty healthfully, but it's pretty boring. We pretty much eat the same things night after night, he admitted. Well, in the past, when someone like John shared a story like that, I always tried to cheer them on nevertheless. As long as you're happy with what you're eating, then it's okay, I would tell them. And it doesn't matter whether the powers that be in the food world would think that your diet is boring. As long as you're happy with it and you can maintain it well, then that's okay. But and this is what I told John. But after the health fair, I got to thinking about that response, and I had to wonder, is it really true? And I don't think so. After giving the issue some thought, I think there really are some risks associated with eating a boring diet, and that's what I want to share about today. First, let me talk a little bit about what do we mean about boring. I've noticed a couple different kinds. The first is the lack of variety kind, and that was the kind that John was talking about. I eat the same thing night after night. They're healthy, but they lack variety. The second kind of boring is the lack of fun kind. In other words, you're eating foods that aren't so bad, but they're so plain and simple that you don't feel very excited or encouraged to make and eat meals that are really good for you. So let's look at that first kind of boring, lack of variety, and talk about the danger that lurks there. And for this, I'm remembering a conversation with my neighbor, Leon, who was interested in eating better, and he was talking to me about it. And he explained that he said, I don't really eat that bad. I do eat a big salad every day. And, it's hard to argue when somebody brings up salad because salad we automatically equate with healthful eating. And that is true to an extent. The problem, though, is sameness, the sameness of our salads. You think about the standard that shows up on a lot of American tables as your lettuce, your cucumbers, and tomatoes. Or even if you're a person who goes to the salad bar and gets a little more variety than that, very often, and I know in Lynn's case this is true, is that he was going to the same salad bar every time. And I'm going to guess that pretty much every time he picked out the same 7 or 8 items that were his favorites. And we're creatures of habits. We get into that rut there. So what's so bad about that kind of routine? Well, here's an important point that I want to interject. It's not that it's so bad. I don't want anybody to feel bad about the way they're eating, especially if they're eating some good foods. It's just that his diet could be a lot healthier and better. And how could it be a lot better? With a lot more diversity and variety. So let's talk about this diversity for a minute because it's such an important part of healthy eating, but it often doesn't get the attention that it deserves. The reason that it's so important is really pretty simple. It's because no one single food can provide all the nutrients that the body needs, right? That's not hard to understand. Think about a person who ate chicken all day, every day, and that's all they ate. And sure, chicken has a lot of good nutrition in it, but if that's all you ate, you'd find your body lacking in a lot of the nutrients that it needs. So of course, we can't get by with just one food. And the fact is, we can't get by with just 10 or 20 or 30. Even as broad as that may seem, it wouldn't give us all the nutrients that we need. And the reason for that is that every food has a unique nutritional profile. So where one food is weak, another is strong, and vice versa. I kind of think of it a lot like people. If you think about it, there's the person who's a great singer, but might not be that great at taking care of children. Or there's the person who's a great software engineer, but they would be terrible at being an outgoing salesperson. Or there's the person who's a great dentist, but wouldn't be very good at running the production line in an automobile factory. But you put us all together and we create a really strong and vibrant community. And foods are that way as well. And one of the things that as I was preparing this talk, I remembered this magazine that I got for a long time ago it summarizes the health philosophy and the eating philosophy of a Dr. Andrew Weil. He's pictured up here. You might have heard of him. He's one of the real pioneers in integrative medicine, and particularly the importance of healthy eating for a healthy body. And so I was flipping through his magazine and I found this article. It was on eating the rainbow of colors. And I'm sure you probably all heard that's a popular campaign now, is eating a rainbow of colors. And I liked what he had to say about it. And so I'm going to read a little bit because it's exactly what we're talking about here. He says, simply eating the recommended 7 to 9 servings of produce daily may not be enough, since different colors of produce contain unique phytonutrients, and they offer a wide range of benefits, making variety key. And isn't that just what we're saying? Even if you're eating 7 to 9 servings of produce, which is good, it may not be enough. So his advice, strive to eat at least 1 serving a day from each color group, and I would up that to 2 servings a day from each color group. Combining produce of different colors at one meal may also, and this is another really neat benefit, it might create a synergistic effect, allowing the variety of phytocompounds and other nutrients to work together to enhance their antioxidant benefits, not to mention their flavor. So that was just what we were talking about. And then I was also reminded of a book that I've had for many years, which is the Wellness Encyclopedia that comes from the University of California at Berkeley. And I remembered that it goes through and gives a profile of almost every food that is known to us. But one of the neat things it offers is this little green box on each food that talks about its key nutrients. And what's interesting is you flip through those little green boxes is to see how different the different foods are. So like when you find a food that's strong in one thing, it's weak in others. For instance, I was comparing artichokes to cauliflower. And artichokes have good amounts of magnesium, while cauliflower really doesn't have much at all. But cauliflower has a lot of vitamin B6, while artichokes don't have that. Meanwhile, I compared parsnips to peas, and parsnips have a lot of potassium, while peas have thiamine. Strawberries are super for vitamin C, but peaches have plenty of vitamin A. So I don't think this is hard to understand, this basic principle of why we really need this huge diversity. So why do we have trouble with it? Well, I think that things can get confusing because of the way that the media operates in our society. And that the way it operates can get us really muddled and confused. And that in turn causes us to fall back on a few old, familiar, and comfortable standbys just so we can avoid that uncomfortable confusion. So let me explain this phenomenon, what I mean. The media loves reporting on health studies. They make really fun and interesting news. And nutrition researchers seem entirely capable of churning out ever more nutrition studies to report on. So now almost every media outlet you read is bursting with information on the latest findings, the latest food darlings, the latest super nutrients. Well, all of this information is good and it's wonderful and it's interesting, but it can have a downside that we may not always realize. And that downside is, I call it a micromanaging mentality around eating. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Let's say, for instance, that you pick up a popular magazine. We often read magazines. Here's this one, Shape. And so you're flipping through it and reading the articles. And one of the first things you see as you're flipping through it is an article that's on pomegranates and how really good they are for giving us polyphenol antioxidants that fight free radicals. Well, that sounds important, and you probably like some of that, right? Well, okay, so you're flipping them. Maybe I ought to get some pomegranates into my diet. Well, and then you're flipping on through the magazine and you get to, oh, here's a really neat recipe. It's a recipe for chickpea and spinach soup or kind of stew, skillet sort of thing. But boy, that looks really good. And then you read about how the zinc in chickpeas helps your body convert beta carotene in spinach to vitamin A, which is another nutrient that plays a role in boosting your immune system. And so you go, wow, well, maybe I better start getting some more spinach and chickpeas into my diet. And then a couple pages later, you read about sunchokes and how they are loaded with iron and fiber. And it's like, well, wow, where can I get those? I better get those into my diet. And finally, you finish out the magazine, and there's this great article on pastas and all the new pastas that are being made from lentils and whole grains. And you find out that if you get some of these wheat alternative pastas, like quinoa, farro, and rice, they'll give you extra hardiness plus nutrients like magnesium and zinc. So now you're thinking, boy, I've got a lot of things that I want to get into my diet. And you're thinking about those, but then the very next week, you're reading the Sunday paper and you come across this article on Nosh for your noggin is what it's called. It's about brain health and brain food. And you find out all sorts more things that you should be getting, like pumpkin seeds, which are packed with potassium, magnesium, and calcium, all of which may delay cognitive decline. Lentils, full of B vitamins for focus and energy. Ginger boosts memory skills and focus. Beets, high in nitrates, which have been shown to increase blood flow in parts of the brain. Well, and so now you got all these more things that you think you've got to get into your diet. And then the next week, you're watching some show with another expert or a podcast, and they're talking about why you need chia seeds or broccoli rabe or kohlrabi or whatever the next thing is. And all of this leads to what I call that micromanaging mentality. What I mean is you're going to be micromanaging your diet, trying to chase after this nutrient and that food and then this nutrient to get that, that food to get this nutrient. And you're trying to do everything the experts recommend, but instead what's probably going to happen is that you're going to get overwhelmed. It's too much to deal with. So what do? You fall back on your few old, familiar, and comfortable standbys just so that you can avoid that uncomfortable confusion. And we're back right to where we started. So I promised you some practical tricks and strategies to beat the boredom problem. And here's the first. It's my easy, low brain damage solution. Don't worry about what foods are or aren't on the most popular list. Eat them all. In other words, don't get sucked into today's food hype about why this food is good for you or that food is good for you. Just steadily and calmly eat as many different things as you can. And if you can just patiently and persistently devote conscious effort to weaving more variety into your diet, then likely as not, you're going to get in all the popular foods that everyone's talking about, but without getting overwhelmed and muddled and confused. Now, here's another practical strategy. In fact, one of the best strategies around for getting more variety into your diet, and that is getting into the habit of planning your meals. As you know, if you plan it, it will happen. And in particular, in this case, if you plan more variety into your meals, you're going to dramatically increase your chances of actually having that variety show up on the table. Now, we have an online class around the Think Ahead and Plan habit. And in that class, we not only learn how to meal plan, but we actually plan meals every week for 4 weeks. So you get to experience how effective it is and how fun it is for getting new foods into your mealtime repertoire. So I hope you'll consider that class, and I'll include a link for it below this video. But there's one trick from that class that I really want to mention, and that's what you do, and this is for getting more variety into your meals, is what you do is after you've planned your meals, stop. Stop and go back and look over the period that you've planned for, whether it's 2 days or 5 days or a week. Look at your overall nutritional variety in your meal plans. Are you getting a variety of grains? Are you getting a variety of vegetables and different colors of vegetables? Are you getting lots of different proteins, some nuts, some legumes? Because here's the thing, is if you can catch a boring diet while it's still just on paper, you can easily inject some things to mix it up. So that's another really good way to start getting more variety into your diet. And I hope you'll give that a try. You know, one thing that might be helpful as you're thinking about all this is to bear in mind that good nutrition is a lot like a puzzle. It could be a helpful way to think about this. If you think of your health as a beautiful puzzle picture, then you want to piece together as many pieces of that puzzle as you possibly can, right? And so you have to think about how every food is a different piece of the puzzle because it has a unique nutritional profile. So eating the same menu of foods day after day means that you only get to enjoy part of that picture of health. But the more wildly diverse that you can be, the more complete and the fuller your picture of health. So in answer to the question of whether a boring diet is so bad as long as it's healthy, the answer is that it's not so bad, but diversifying it would bring you so much closer to your goal of wonderful, healthful eating and good health. Without that critical diversity, you're cheating yourself of the fullest picture of good health. So now let's go on to that second kind of boring, which is the lack of fun kind. Now I want to tell you about Susan's story. I hear about this kind of lack of fun kind of boring all the time in our healthy meal making classes. But with Susan, I heard an especially compelling story, and it was just a couple weeks ago. It was after a meeting where Susan and I were both attending, and we stayed after to chat a little bit. And of course, the conversation turned to healthy eating. And Susan actually had some great news to share about her recent weight loss. And she was doing a great job, pretty proud of it, and rightly so. But then she shared the part of her food life that wasn't so great. And that was that she was bored practically to tears by the monotony of her diet. She had only 5 things that she made over and over again. There was chicken one night, then salmon, then pork, then spaghetti, then hamburgers. Again and again and again. Occasionally she'd break it up with a little turkey. So clearly she was suffering from the lack of variety kind of boring, eating those same few things over and over. But she was also suffering from the lack of fun kind as well. I just have no imagination were her words. And she was clearly distressed that food was just no fun at all. And what is also clear is that Susan she didn't want to give up the progress on her weight loss, but it seemed like she was at a risk of losing it just because she seemed to be hanging on to her weight loss just by sheer determination and discipline. And that gets to the second danger of a boring diet, especially one that's no fun. It's the siren call of temptation. There was nothing bad about the foods that Susan was eating, but when meals are lackluster, repetitious, and just no fun, it gets harder and harder to stay on your virtuous eating path. And that's especially true in our culture where temptation in the form of junk food is in practically every nook and cranny of our lives. Everywhere we go, everywhere we turn, there's some kind of cheap and readily available junk food to tempt us. Well, the question you might be having right now is like, wait a minute, fun? You're saying that fun is important to healthy eating? I mean, it seems almost like fun. What does it have to do with healthy eating? It almost seems disrespectful and frivolous compared to the very serious nature of healthy eating. And indeed, it is common thinking that healthy eating is very serious business that takes discipline and determination. And who cares if it's fun? Just do it and be done with it, kind of like taking your medicine. Well, to me, that's kind of backwards and unfortunate thinking, quite frankly. Fun, delightfulness, and engagement are actually very critical components of healthy eating and achieving our healthy eating goals. And here's the simple reason: because fun things are things that we'll do. If something's fun and interesting to us, we'll find the time to do it, and we'll do it regularly and consistently, which, by the way, are critical if you're going to achieve the health benefits of good eating. You've got to be doing it day in and day out, not just a couple times a month or even once a week, day in, day out, every day. So think about, and the problem is doing that is really hard if something isn't fun. But think about the other things in your life that are fun, that you really enjoy. Maybe it's gardening, maybe it's getting together with friends, or hiking, watching movies, reading. Likely as not, you don't have any trouble making yourself do those or finding the time and energy to do them. But all too often, that's not the case with meal making. Maybe it's even hard for you to think about meal making in the fun category of your life. But in point of fact, there is a great deal of fun waiting in the kitchen. It may not be the same as, going out for wine and hors d'oeuvres with your friends on Friday after work, but there are many forms of fun. And one of those forms is creativity. We humans were meant to be creative beings. And if you look around at the world around us, look at all the ways in which we're creative. From the way they've harnessed lightning and put it into wires that they call electricity, or from little gadgets that allow you to talk to someone on the other side of the world, or the way somebody can build a skyscraper that goes from bare ground up to hundreds of feet in the air. Or think about huge enterprises that can control and run airlines that go all over the world, to small enterprises, like an enterprise that might just build schools in Africa. And around the kitchen, I always think of things like my Vitamix or my lemon juicer or my little Juliner. Those are kind of inventions that are human creations that are closer to my heart. But the bottom line is that we humans are creators. We're creators of things, relationships, organizations, homes, schools, community groups, and events. But then look at our food lives. 3 times a day, day after day, this big chunk of our lives is stuck in a creative funk. So no wonder meal making and meal times can be such a depressing disappointment, because this big chunk of our lives is completely out of sync with our creative nature and our creative urges. Yet it is not at all impossible to introduce some creative fun into our lives, our food lives, if we'll just give it a bit of our time and energy. And I see this in our healthy meal making classes all the time. We get new cooks or cooks that are a little bit uninspired, and we introduce them to new ideas, new recipes, new ingredients, and all of a sudden they're saying, "Oh, this is fun." They're like so surprised. "This is fun," they say. And indeed it is. And then there's another kind of fun, though, that comes from the kitchen. And that's the kind that comes from the sense of empowerment. The empowerment comes from being able to make meals that you really like and knowing that they are serving you and your body. There's a certain exhilaration in knowing that you can have some control over your health, this vital area of your life, that you're not just at the whim of chronic diseases and a medical system that you don't quite understand. There's something you can do about it and take control. And so that having that sense of self-reliance is a surprisingly nice feeling and a form of fun in its very own way. So meal making can most certainly be infused with creative fun and empowerment fun. But just in the same way that you have to give energy to get energy, you do have to devote a bit of time and energy to meal making to initiate that shift to more fun and enjoyment in the kitchen. But can you imagine if we did this and we discovered that there really is an element of enjoyment in meal making? Can you see that we could help us avoid the second danger of boring meals, which is the risk of bailing on our healthy eating goals, like Susan, I think, is about to, just because meal making and eating are so mind-numbingly tiresome that you can't stand it anymore? Well, if you're wondering, how can I start having more of this creative fun and empowerment fun with my meal times? This is where I want to share another practical strategy. And it gets into our mission in this area, which is to share what I call the kitchen smart tools, skills, and strategies that turn healthy meal making into something that's manageable and enjoyable. And one of those kitchen smart skills that's really key to avoiding boredom in the kitchen is creating a helpful and healthy pantry. And I mention this specifically now because we are offering a class on creating and cooking from the pantry, just because it is so important for beating boredom and all the dangers that go with it, and getting the fun and diversity you need to stay on track to your healthy eating goals. So a good way to think about the pantry is it's your meal making inventory. So if you have some interesting, non-boring inventory, you're going to be able to make interesting, non-boring meals. And if you have inventory with a lot of nutritional variety, then you'll be able to make meals with that critical wild diversity built in. Or another way to say this is that the pantry opens the door to possibilities. Stock it with different grains and beans and nuts and seeds, a variety of vegetables and meats in the freezers, spices and condiments. And all of a sudden, so many vibrant possibilities are open to you. But keep a boring pantry and you'll have boring meals that make you vulnerable to fast foods and don't give you that wild diversity you really need. Now, interestingly, going back to my story with Susan, there was one bright spot in our conversation, and it came courtesy of the pantry. Near the end of our conversation, Susan remembered a meal that she'd made just a few nights earlier. She had had an avocado that was about to go bad, and her usual hamburger, and her usual low-carb tortillas that's allowed on her diet. But it was something in her pantry that made it possible to go beyond just a plain hamburger yet again. She had bought, but forgotten about, a jar of salsa in her pantry. But that particular night, she was looking in the cupboards and she saw it, and all of a sudden it sparked the idea that I could make a burrito. So she made a hamburger burrito with the salsa and the avocado, and it was so simple, and yet it lit up her eyes, and she was so excited to talk about it. The dish had obviously brightened her evening with just a little creativity fun. So, can I encourage you to take a look at your pantry? What's hiding in there? Can it dispel boredom by supplying more variety in your diet? Can it keep you from temptation by offering an option to add a little fun pizzazz to your meals? And on this count, I want to bring up one more practical trick. Just the other day, one of our readers told me that all my talk about the pantry that's leading up to our pantry class inspired her to a new commitment. So every week, she's making a point of choosing one ingredient that's just been hanging out in her pantry and putting it to use. Exactly. What a great idea to put more variety in her diet, and more fun. And so can I encourage you, maybe that trick would work for you as well. So now, would you like to learn more about how you can create a pantry that will beat boredom in your food life? And would you like to learn more about how to cook healthy meals from the pantry with lots of valuable nutritional diversity? Well, would you join me for my hands-on Do As You Learn workshop, where you'll not only learn about the pantry, but you'll have the opportunity to start making changes in your pantry. And you can follow along with me in your kitchen. We're going to be doing this online. So you'll be in your kitchen, I'll be in my kitchen. You can follow along with me as we cook something easy and delicious from the pantry. I hope you'll join me. Click the link below for more information and to register. And I want to thank you for joining me for this little webinar. And I want to wish you happy meal making with much fun and wild diversity. Goodbye now.